Good afternoon. Today is Friday, August 2nd, 2024. My name is Atimaneda George. I'm a Green Fellow with the American Folklife Center, a division of the Library of Congress. And today I have Izetta Izzy Mingo-Moreau as my guest. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to begin by asking you to tell us your origin story.
Thank you. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina. So I'm a native of South Carolina, uh, the oldest or the eldest of four. Uh, let's see, I lived most of my life in Charleston, South Carolina, until I went to college at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, where I was a pre-med undergrad. Um, with aspirations to become a doctor. Uh, at some point along my journey, I decided that medicine was not where I needed to be. It was not my calling. And in turn, discovered that perhaps what the world needed was less doctors and more people working in public health. And so I was able to join my interest in political science and health to work in public health. And so that became the new trajectory, if you will. And so I determined that international public health was what I wanted to do. And international, why international? That became something of an interest to me after a trip in college, my sophomore year, to East Africa. It was a political science trip. And so, um, given my interest in health, I would ask different health questions as we did our courses in public health, and we met with different local professors, and thinking about what just being in the atmosphere. What did I see? How did I see people living? What did I see that the challenges were? Uh, I was able to really start to bring together uh, where health met political science in sort of that public health space. So thinking about the policies that were enacted and how those really had an impact on people's lives, perhaps more than uh, whether they had enough doctors in a particular place. So I think that rounded out my understanding a little bit more about where I thought my best contributions could be. And so from that trip in my sophomore year to Kenya and Tanzania, I determined that I would change my focus slightly, still interested in health, but looking at sort of the more widening the aperture a bit, looking at more public health and policy types of actions. And so I think really from there, I was able to sort of set my sights on, well, what is a career in international public health look like? Um, it was definitely a far cry from where I started. My interest in health in general was something I had for a long time. Ever since I was a really little girl, I really thought that I was going to be a doctor. People told me, "You're going to be a doctor. You're so smart. You're going to be a doctor." As a black woman, it's the thought was we need more black doctors, and so that's what you could become, that as a way to contribute and give back. And it's definitely something that a profession that people respected. And I thought, well, that would be something to do that can make contributions um, to the community and also to the world as a doctor. But as I just mentioned, that trajectory changed a little bit, and I molded myself to thinking, well, public health is it's a bit broader and perhaps even more impactful than just being one doctor to however many patients. when you look at public health, you look at a broader picture and you can impact so many more. You impact the health of populations. And so once out of undergrad, I went to Peace Corps. I determined that the best way to do this was to, after my bachelor's degree, go to Peace Corps, do Peace Corps for 2 years, and do a master's degree in public health, and then get a job with any number of NGOs working in that public health space. That was how I saw my career, and that's kind of what I did.
NGO?
Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. A non-governmental organization.
Thank you.
The likes of CARE, Save the Children, those entities that I'd seen, interestingly enough, growing up as a kid, late night television, you would often see the commercials for Save a Child or Help Feed a Child for $1 a day, that kind of thing. And I think right here is actually a place perhaps I should stop and and reflect on something that was very, very influential to me. And I didn't realize how influential it was until later on when I was talking with some colleagues about how I got to this job. Um, it was a song, Man in the Mirror by Michael Jackson. That video impacted me so much. I did not realize at the time as a young child, but thinking back on it, the idea that I could make a change and by looking at who I was in the mirror and seeing how I can contribute, and perhaps it was the imagery that that video had in it at the time as well, it all had an impact on me in such a way that I really saw myself in that space, um, making a difference or trying to make a difference at least to people um, outside of my immediate sphere of influence. So not necessarily staying in Charleston, South Carolina, or even in the U.S. I saw a very real possibility of myself working overseas, being able to influence what happens to others. And so bringing together that idea, and those experiences as a child, that song, the images from the late night watching TV and seeing the Save the Children, and then also the influences in college and the idea that broader influences is something not outside of my own reach. Um, I decided to join Peace Corps, and Peace Corps, one of the things they say about Peace Corps is the hardest job you'll ever love. But that's where I tested myself. That's where I really was able to see, yes, I can do this. I can live overseas. Peace Corps tests everything you know about yourselves. It puts you in places where completely different experience from your own life, and asks you basically to give of yourself, to be vulnerable and dependent on others for your own safety and security. And it helps you, I would say, touch a humanity inside yourself, perhaps that you didn't know was there, in order to say, yes, I can be out here and be a world citizen and help and work with others to improve their lives. And so I joined Peace Corps as a public health volunteer. Um, and I think, again, interestingly, given that I am a Black woman from the South, not a lot of us show up in places like Peace Corps and in organizations like Peace Corps. And so when the recruiters basically understood who I was, they were like, "Where do you want to go?" And I'd learned French. I'd started learning French in seventh grade. It was the only foreign language they had in the middle schools in Charleston, South Carolina. But interestingly enough, it was a foreign language that they had. And so I started learning French in seventh grade, kept it up through college, and I said, well, can I go to a francophone country? Can I go to a francophone West African country? And they said, sure. And they sent me to Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, in West Africa, and I did that. I joined Peace Corps in 2001, and unfortunately, due to a coup, was evacuated in October, late 2002. But had basically completed my 2 years of service there. Again, as a public health volunteer. So basically, I was able to see in real time and live in real time the public health challenges of populations in developing countries. So I could test out, is this the kind of space that I want to work in? Is this the kind of world, um, in terms of a career, that I want to engage in? What are the realities of people living in places with, less than perfect healthcare, less than perfect healthcare systems. I was able to witness many births at torchlight, literal hurricane lamps. We had hurricane lamps, and because there was no electricity in the village where I was working, when living, and I was working side by side the midwife, doing public health work. She was delivering the babies. I was holding the torch. But just to see that situation, people living their daily lives, living, dying, giving birth, having celebrations, but in situations of less than optimal healthcare, I said, yeah, this is the space I want to be in. If anything, to show that there are things that people can do. So there's small public health things that people can do to improve their lives. Um, Daily. And so that was kind of where I was. Peace Corps is very local. It's very focused at that level, that local level. It's really about your village. And the experiences that you have with the folks that you work with day to day, the friends you make, the people you come to know and care about. And so I knew, again, it was difficult. It was not easy by any means. Um, as much as I wanted to be working and living in Francophone West Africa, as a Black woman, there were a lot of challenges to doing that. For example, I was not immediately known as the American volunteer in the village. They actually accused me of being the midwife's sister. They said, we had a Peace Corps volunteer, so why did you bring us your sister? I just laughed with, tongue in cheek, in a way, feeling okay, they don't necessarily see or notice me as a different person, and that gives me advantages in working in this space, but it can also give disadvantages, which I might speak about a little bit later. In working internationally as a Black woman, often you can be invisible, and often you can be all too visible, and often they can be in the same room, which is very interesting. um, but at least as a volunteer, I kind of managed that, and I think I was able to, I think, influence in ways that perhaps my peers who were not Black, might have not been able to do. So I really just took the time to build on and to appreciate that Peace Corps experience for the time I had, and then I came back to grad school right after that. Pretty much, I came back to grad school at George Washington University School of Public Health, and it was really good. Solid public health curriculum. Global public health was my focus. Trying to integrate what I had just learned and lived and experienced as a Peace Corps volunteer to the coursework, and things as diverse as statistics to infectious disease prevention. So all of that put together. Really enjoyed the time doing that. Um, and then I had this wonderful opportunity that I don't know, I was in the right place, I think, at the right time. And I am definitely a believer in, if you are on the right path, if you're in the space you're supposed to be in, doors and windows will open for you. Because one of my professors at George Washington at the time also worked with the U.S. Agency for International Development, um, as a specialist. Actually, I had two professors, but the one professor that I'm thinking about uh, just said, well, USAID is going to be opening up their recruitment soon. It's going to be like the first time that they've done this in a long while, for their entry level positions. They're going to open it up. I think you should apply. And I said, okay. If you recall, I had mentioned that my trajectory was, do Peace Corps, then grad school, then work for a non-governmental organization like the CARE or someone. USAID was after, right before working for the WHO, the World Health Organization. This is, my thinking in terms of progression. But I got this tip. I applied. I mean, it wasn't like a secret, but he gave the information, and maybe if he hadn't given the information, I may not have seen it, the advertisement. I may not have known about it. He gave me the information. I applied. I went through the very rigorous selection process and got selected as an entry level professional. At the bottom of the rung, all you needed was a master's degree and 2 years of experience. But out of I'm not sure how many candidates, I was chosen, and that's where it started in terms of my professional career in international development. Um, and and that's where I've been for the last almost 20 years now, with the USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development. I applied for and started as a health, population, and nutrition officer. Uh, did my basically only 6 months in Washington, sort of orientation and training, and left in June, no, not June, January of 2007 to Accra, Ghana as my first post, with the U.S. Foreign Service. So I see myself now as a diplomat. I think then I just saw myself as perhaps a more grown-up Peace Corps volunteer, interestingly enough. But but now I was representing the U.S. government. You know, I was no longer simply working at the grassroots level, but I was working and implementing U.S. foreign policy, U.S. development policy. Um, again, as a representative of the U.S. government to whomever I was facing in different countries. And so I started in Ghana, and I was actually covering the whole of West Africa. We were in their regional office that is based in Ghana. And so that was my first posting. I stayed there for 2 years. From there, I moved to Senegal, Dakar, Senegal, where I stayed for 4 years. There, I met my lovely husband. I had my first child, and then again, all as a health officer. Again, working on such topics as malaria, working for the president's malaria initiative, for example, implementing those policies, and making sure that bed nets were delivered on time to whomever needed bed nets during the mass campaigns in those countries. Working on other maternal and child health aspects such as nutrition and food security, as well as family planning work, water and sanitation works. We had very robust portfolios of activities in both the West Africa regional and in Dakar, Senegal. After 4 years in Dakar, I moved on to 5 years in Kinshasa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I had another child, and continued again working in the health space. And there, Congo is big. The programs are big. It's one of the largest malaria programs in the agency, for example. It also had a very robust HIV/AIDS program. We dealt with Ebola outbreaks. We dealt with yellow fever outbreaks, and a whole host of fun and interesting things in terms of just how do you help, how do you work with local government, how do you work with national government to help protect populations, from various things. So for the yellow fever outbreak, for example, that was coming in from Angola. For whatever reason, it was a very massive outbreak. I don't recall the details, but all we knew was the spillover was coming into Congo and into Kinshasa, which by itself has a population of 12 million people. And so the fear was that if yellow fever was running rampant in Kinshasa, it was just a very it was a very negative and dire situation for the rest of the country. And so, working with the Centers for Disease Control, other U.S. government partners on the ground, other international partners, the Japanese, for example, in the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, I think is the how the acronym goes, but JICA, um, and the Koreans and others, we all came together to come up with a plan for how to strengthen the laboratory capacity in Kinshasa, and also how to get doses of vaccine, which were in a shortage. It was a worldwide shortage of yellow fever vaccine at that time. We actually did a very sort of innovative thing at the time, which was break the doses, because at that time they called it fractional dosing. At that time, they had discovered that the full dose would cover you for 10 years, which we already knew. But if you split the doses into smaller portions, you could get enough immunity to cover people for a significant period of time. So you could use the same amount of doses, the same amount of available vaccine to vaccinate more people. And so, in that way, we were able to vaccinate millions of people in Kinshasa with enough vaccine to help attenuate the spread of yellow fever at that time. So, just thinking about all the amazing things that we were able to do to help populations, I look back now and I think, wow, I could have continued on as a doctor and done, work in somewhere in the U.S. in a clinic in a practice. But just thinking about how much I've been able to use U.S. government resources to help so many millions of people in the different places where I've worked, um, feels good. I honestly have to say it feels good to say that I've been part of that, and it feels like I've been able to give back. As someone, I guess it's part of my origin story, growing up in America, growing up in a place like Charleston, South Carolina, where faith and family is so strong. We were taught to be appreciative of what we were given, and to think that and to understand that to whom much is given, much is expected. We are citizens. We do have a responsibility to our brother. I'm my brother's keeper, and so this has allowed me. This path has helped me realize that to make that a reality in my life, and so I'm definitely appreciative of that. And after Congo, I did 5 years in Conakry, Republic of Guinea, where I had one more child. So now, if you're keeping up, there's a husband and three children, all in Francophone Africa. Been able to maintain that as sort of my place where, again, I feel like I have the most influence and an edge, if you will, a little, in terms of I had the language ability and skills, so I played to that strength of mine coming into the agency, and just continued on working in that space. So I did 5 years there, where we lived COVID. We lived the COVID outbreak and the COVID response and the vaccine response there. And I was able to actually move further, I would say advance in my career. So until Guinea, I had been a health officer. So working squarely in the health space, first as sort of a more junior officer, and then I moved up to the office director positions in Congo and then in Guinea. But by the time I got to um, Conakry, an opportunity arose for me to become deputy of the mission, the USAID mission there. And so, for those who may not be familiar, USAID has a mission structure. So you have embassies. People are probably pretty familiar with embassies, where you have your ambassador and all the different sections of the embassy. USAID has missions in a lot of countries where it works. And you have a mission director, so that person's the sort of head, and then you have a deputy. And they often are co-located with U.S. embassies. So we work as one USG team, but we have our separate leadership as USAID, um, all under the ambassador's sort of authority, if you will. Anyway, so I was able to become leadership now to the whole mission, not simply looking at health work, but also now looking at the whole portfolio of work that we did, including democracy and governance work, economic growth work. Um, and it was something that I had not thought about ever really moving into. My goal was really to remain in public health and work in that space until retirement. But again, the door opened for me, and I took that opportunity, I walked through it, and was able to work as a deputy mission director for several years there before my transition back to Washington. And that experience allowed me, again, this the purview to see the whole of what USAID does, but also interactions with the embassy and the broader impact that the US government has around the world. Um, and the force for good, if allow me to sound a little corny, that we can be in the world, being able to bring the work and the development assistance through for health, for example, or democracy and governance work, but also our political and negotiation skills with our State Department colleagues. Guinea, unfortunately, went through a very difficult political situation um, as we arrived, and that basically continued the same 5 years that we were there, um, and ended unfortunately uh, a coup. They overthrew the elected president while we were there, and had been working towards reestablishing democratic governance even up until our departure. Um, and seeing how both the work that USA does in development and the work that the State Department does, and even our military colleagues do, come together to work with that country to have the conversations and to demonstrate our good faith and their desire to move towards democratic governance. Um, it's again something that we should, or rather, that I had not thought that I would be able to see or actually be part of, let alone influence. And so I was very appreciative to have that opportunity. Trying to think. So after Guinea, um, which was just 2023, sorry, it's just 2023. We left Guinea last summer and have been in Washington. My family and I have been in Washington now, where I am currently the director of USAID's director of the Office of Strategic and Program Planning and USAID's Programming, Learning, and Resources Bureau. And Washington, after being in the field for all of my career and coming back to Washington, it's been a transition. It's a little different. And it's seeing our work from a different angle. And so if I look back to sort of where I began even in the undergrad, sort of figuring out, well, how do I bring together health and political science into this international public health space? You know, I could not have written this story, but looking back, I see how it was every step got me exactly to where I am now. And now I'm looking at from a 10,000-foot view of U.S. foreign policy through the lens of the development and humanitarian assistance work that our agency does. And I'm able to see, well, what's going to help make our programming more effective or more impactful in any given country? What are the things we need to consider um, that are the same or different from what we've been talking about for the last 15, close to 20 years? And that's now where I sit. I sit at at a different level, and I'm able to sort of influence things from a different angle, I guess, which is from a different level. I can see um, how policies that we enact or how different administrations' priorities come into the agency. I can see how we push those out to our field missions and how the missions themselves interpret that and feed that back I'm able to see different regions perhaps more clearly because I'm not simply in Africa region where I was for the last 18 years. I now see how Asia reacts to the same types of policies, or the E&E Bureau, our European Eurasia Bureau, or the Middle East Bureau, for example, or Latin American Caribbean Bureau. And so I think all in all, it's been really, really interesting to say the least, but it's been very, very rewarding. Um, and I'm not done yet, I guess. I'm not done yet.
Thank you so much. This has been a very rich tour de force of a fascinating life and career. I wonder if we could pivot. You had mentioned that you wanted to come back to issues related to being a Black woman navigating in the world and representing the United States.
Sure. Where do I start? Um, it's just very interesting, and I think perhaps I've also had a very interesting, or I guess everyone thinks they have a unique experience, and so I'll stick with that. I think I had a unique experience where within the agency, the U.S. Agency for International Development, as well as in my career at large. And so, as I kind of alluded to, even as a Peace Corps volunteer, that was my first real experience seeing how the world reacts to me, or at least a part of the world reacts to me. Um, and I don't think I was ready for it. And it took a while to sort of digest and manage what that meant. So what is it, and how did people react? I think, as I kind of mentioned, in the same room, or at least in the same day, I could be with a group of people who recognized me for, or as sort of the American with a certain amount of authority, or at least by proxy authority that comes with the position that I held a U.S. government official, and in others, I could be completely ignored and unseen, um, because, again, having worked in Francophone Africa, because I looked like everyone else. In every country where I went, invariably someone said, "You look like my cousin, you look like my sister, you look like my whoever." And while that, I think it does create a certain affinity and I think a bit of ease, at least initially, it also can create a little bit of discomfort, because knowing that, well, but I'm not Senegalese, or I'm not Ghanaian, or I'm not, what, pick the country, um, in terms of what I'm here to do and what I need to do, that can create a little bit of friction, in terms of being able to carry out your job, um, and feel completely at ease doing that. So I think the ways that I've been perceived has been multifaceted. So, um, for example, I think one example that I can think of is, I remember going to a meeting, and one of my colleagues, who happened to have been a military gentleman, um, a Caucasian man, he mentioned he'd been working in the country longer than me, and he said, "Now, what's going to happen is they're going to look at you and they're going to think you're my secretary." And I said, "Oh, is that true?" He said, "Yes. That's just part of the culture here. Is That's just how the culture is." there's a still sort of a respect given to the white man who walks into the room as the American official, even if he's not the highest ranking person, I guess, in the delegation. And so he said, they're going to do that. But I'm going to make sure that everyone knows that you're actually in charge, that you're my boss, and that I do not have a clue what's going on. And I think it was very insightful for him to say that. It showed, one, that he understood the lay of the land in a way that others may have missed it. Um, but that he was able to tell me that without having any qualms about it also showed a certain assuredness of himself, that I have no ego in this. I know that we are here as a USG team, and I want you to understand that I know that, um, and that we are now prepared to walk in the room as a USG team to sort of understand the dynamic that we will meet on the other side of this door. And I think it was just, I was appreciative of that. And yes, sure enough, that was the dynamic that started. But as soon as he kept referring to me and asking and making sure that people understood that I was the one with the information, that the dynamic started to shift. And that's part of what I've been really happy to do in some places. To be that, I call it disruptor. But I think the reality is that in a lot of places, particularly where we work, there's a dynamic, male female dynamic, and a racial dynamic that we may not be aware of until we get there and have to face it. In a lot of the countries where we work, women are still second class citizens. They don't hold necessarily high positions of high authority or power. Um, there's an expectation, for example, that if you are a woman, that you are married, and there's a certain amount of respect comes from that, being married. Um, Even if you're professional, sort of the first level of respect comes from, are you married? Do you have children? Oh, you're the professional too. Oh, that's great. And so navigating that has been a very interesting thing within my career. Um, Before I lose my train of thought, I wanted to make sure I got back to that the sort of other piece about the sort of dynamic. There's also a racial dynamic where, because the US government, but all, I mean, I think this is just true of, I would say, the prevailing sort of powers in terms of the countries that are, the leaders in the world, the France, the Germany, the England, the countries that lead this conversation in the development space, um, have been fronted, if you will, represented by white men for history, for the since the inception of these types of engagements. Only now are more minorities and more women out front, and you still can see traces of that initial, or that deference to, oh, but you, or the expectation. Let's call it that. Let's call it the expectation that the white guy in the suit is the is U.S. government official, and not the other person. And if there's no white guy in a suit, it's the white lady in the suit, not necessarily the minority person coming in. And so what I've felt really proud about is being able to be part of that vanguard of people still changing that perception about America. America is multicultural. America has, yeah, the face of America is my face. My face is the face of America. And I've been able to do that over the last 18 years with the counterparts that I've worked with in these countries, from health ministers to prime ministers to presidents. My face is the face of America, not only the face of my white colleagues. And so that's not, like I said, always been easy. I think initially it took a lot of courage and support from colleagues to help me walk that. Because I think it was a little bit, I would have to be honest and say it was a little bit demoralizing initially, but to sort of be ignored or to be sort of looked over in the instances where that did happen. but with the help of really well, really self-aware colleagues who understood that not everybody lives this experience the same way, and that for all of us to be successful, you have to support each person. They supported me, and so I really, really give give kudos to those colleagues who did that. Like I said, that colleague who was very self-aware and said, "Nope, this is how it's going to be, but I'm going to help make sure that that we right size this expectation." Um, I hope that helps. I hope that made sense.
Yes, thank you so very much. I wonder, Izzy, if we could pivot yet again,
Okay.
and if you would give some thought to the person in the future who's watching this recording and share your insights about international affairs, about
Mm.
pursuing a career in the Foreign Service. What is your message?
What is my message? I think my message is that it's a calling. You have to hear it from a voice within you that this is where you need to be. I recall um, back in Peace Corps, one of the first questions they ask is, "Why are you here?" Um, because yeah, that was a week after we'd gotten into the country where we were going to serve, and everything's still new, and you're still like your head is spinning from everything. The food is different, the air is different, everything is different. They ask you why you're here, and I remember my answer: "This is where I'm supposed to be." Not that I had figured everything out, that I knew where it was going to end, but knowing that this was where I was supposed to be. And I think that, and I know that that has been my answer throughout the years. That as hard as it has been, as challenging as it has been, um, either, yeah, I've always felt that it has been a calling for me to be right here, right now, going through whatever that challenge is. And so I think there are people who probably do it because they're enamored with, oh, the international life, the living in interesting countries, the cultural aspects of it. I think that that's true, but I think also deep down inside, it's a calling to live so far away from all that you know, to constantly face the new and the different. Um, Being from Charleston, I think that this kind of connects to it. In Charleston, anyone who's been to the South, but particularly to Charleston and places like that, the trees are very old. You have oak trees that are 400 years old, for example. You have trees that have been here before the founding of the country. They're still there. In a place like Charleston, history and roots run deep. And for someone like me from there to be able to go out, you know, for me, it's a bit stunning because a lot of people don't leave. It's a place where people stay. It's that kind of place. You're rooted there, if you will. If you take the tree analogy, um, but when the career is your calling, you have that strength to branch out, to go out, to explore and to experience, and you can do that. You have the confidence to do that. Perhaps because you're so rooted, because I'm so rooted in where I'm from, I can do that. But I think it's just what I guess I'm trying to say is you need to know that it is something that you really are called to do because life will, you will go through many storms. You will be battered from one side to another in this kind of career. It's not what it seems like on TV. It's not all cocktail parties and fancy meetings with ambassadors and high level officials. A lot of it, it's challenging. A lot of it's living through uncertainty, um, dealing with things that you never thought you would deal with. Countries in political turmoil, evacuations. My family, for example, got evacuated twice out of Congo. Well, I had to stay. I had to put my family on a boat to go over to Brazzaville, the other Congo right next door, because of the challenges. How do you mentally deal with those? How do you emotionally deal with those? Um, as if you don't know that this is where you're supposed to be, at least rooted in the knowledge that this is where I'm supposed to be, and having a partner. Not gonna deny my husband's fortitude in all of this. That is there with you, but you have to know that this is where you're supposed to be. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult. I think the personal challenges that you may have to face as a woman, as whomever, everyone's got challenges, living overseas and living in this particular lifestyle. Um, Mine are unique to me as a Black woman. Others people have different experiences, nonetheless challenging. But you have to know that it is what you, if it is what you are called to do, that you can do it. Um, what else would I tell someone in the future? Someone who's considering international careers. America needs you. I think the strength of America lies in its can-do spirit and its can-do attitude. And I think we have that because we live in a country that has been so blessed with natural resources, with peace and security. Not all countries have that. And to the extent you aspire to, or at least agree with the idea that you are your brother's keeper, then international affairs, international relations, international development, all of these sort of related careers is a way to demonstrate that, to work through the most powerful government on the planet to help improve the conditions of all of us who live on this planet. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.